Benedict, let's start with Gaza and what's going on there. What do you make of this delay on this ceasefire deal? We're told it's signed and sealed. Sounds like Hamas well, the claim is, again, from both sides, Hamas is backtracking.
I mean, for a start, there was a need to rush this announcement out from the US because this is what this is ultimately about. It's for the consumption of a US audience, not necessarily for the Middle East, which you might think is a bit strange given that this is a hostage exchange between two warring sides there. But this was the Biden administration trying to piggyback on the Trump administration so that both sides can say we've got to win either late in the day, very late in the day, or good and early. But both sides, obviously, in this conflict absolutely loathe each other. Both sides don't trust each other. Hamas has a history of duplicitous behaviour. And frankly, why wouldn't
Wait a minute, why would people who would take babies hostage, would rape and mutilate women and murder innocent families in their homes? Why on earth would you think that they wouldn't be honest?
You'd think after a while of them being killed in great big numbers that they might run out of people who had that mindset, but it turns out not necessarily. They're still there. But also from a purely practical perspective, why would Hamas give these people up? If that's their worldview, hostages are pretty much their only leverage at the moment because they know that Israel
why they took them.
will go to great lengths.
This is one of my concerns, though. I mean, the reason why they took hostages was for leverage. They thought it might possibly stop Israel bombing.
Yeah.
Israel did bomb, then they've been, we were killing innocent children in Palestinians. You're also risking the lives of your hostages, and they've got something to negotiate with. Otherwise, they got nada, nothing, zilch, zero. That's what they did. So when you do a deal where you've handed back loads of prisoners, Hamas prisoners, including Hamas terrorists. Again, a few years back, it was, Yahya Sinwar, who then masterminded the Hamas attack on October the 7th, who was one of those prisoners who was released in a similar sort of exchange deal. You hand those people back, it's an interesting exchange rate. Now, not as bad as previously, but it'd be like 1,000 prisoners for one IDF soldier who'd been held captive. But I mean, to get those, if it was my baby and my toddler, if it was my daughter, if I was the mother of Emily Denari, 28-year-old British Israeli, you know what? Any price I'm happy to be paid to get my child back. But is it a good idea for governments to do that? Because what you're telling them, what you're telling Hamas right now, and Hezbollah and Iran, you know what, take hostages. That's the leverage. That's the thing that really puts pressure on our government. That's the thing that will get us to the negotiating table. That's the thing that will get you the aid. That's the thing that will help you. Are we not, and Israel not setting themselves up for more failure in the future?
Only if they actually abide by the ceasefire, which I don't think they're going to. Politically,
Israel.
Israel. It doesn't actually matter what Hamas does. It's whether or not Israel takes its own defence around Gaza seriously.
But they're reserving the right that if there are further threats...
Much in the same way as when there was the ceasefire in Lebanon with Hezbollah, Israel reserved the right to be able to go in and bomb whoever they want if they think that Hezbollah is about to violate it, which they have. It's written in the ceasefire agreement, and I know that lots of Middle Eastern outlets go, oh, well, they're violating the ceasefire. No, it's there in black and white because they won, basically. We can do what we want. I imagine, even though it won't be couched in those terms, because, again, this is being sold to an audience in the US that is actually instinctively very anti-Israel, strangely enough, the Israelis, they're going to keep the Philadelphia corridor, they're going to keep the perimeter very tight. There's no, whatever freedoms there were for people in Gaza before, and there weren't huge amounts relatively, that's not going to happen again. And I think
we also know an awful lot of aid is going to go in. Billions and billions in aid is going to go in.
It's not actually going to change anything.
Yeah, okay. Well, great. I'm glad that people are going to get food and water and medicine. I absolutely don't want ordinary people to be suffering. But we know what happened to the aid last time it all went in.
Yeah,
and it went to Hamas. They built tunnels. And we're not talking about like digging a little tunnel. And we were talking. You've seen the images. I mean, these are epic. You can get a Humvee through these tunnels.
Well, but this is partly, of course,
light
why
and electricity
when we're talking about a massive sort of rebuilding program for Gaza, lots of other Middle Eastern states who, the expectation is that they will bear the brunt of the financial costs of rebuilding Gaza. They don't want Hamas there because they know what happens to the money when it goes in. They don't want their money to be wasted. Actually, the average, Gulf princeling is not an idiot.
They want this all to go away.
They understand how this works.
But in terms of Arab populations in many of those countries, they are far more extreme than their leadership.
They are.
Apart from Iran, where they're the more extreme.
I have to say, actually, the leaderships of a lot of Arab countries are sick to the teeth of the Palestinian issue. They don't like them as people.
It was a useful weapon they had against the West and against Israel for a long time.
But These people, as I say, they're not stupid. They understand that the Palestinians have lost this. They're not going to get their state in the form that they want it to be. And the lesson of that is, if you keep on invading your bigger, stronger neighbour and you keep losing and you're not very good at war, you can't be surprised when after a while that country goes, OK, that territory, that's ours now. You're not having that. It's what happened to Germany. It's what happened to Italy. It's what happened to Japan. That's the lesson of history. But
also the West is not going to allow Israel to be wiped off the map. End of. We're not. Well, Israel ain't going to allow Israel to be wiped off the map.
Israel won't.
And I'm with them 100% of that. I do want to play a quick clip, though, of Joe Biden yesterday. We had the Qatari Prime Minister, because we're all just pretending Qatar is this lovely, cuddly country, while they've been harbouring terrorists all these time. But Joe Biden made his announcement from the White House, who then later on made his sort of final speech from the White House, a final address to the nation. There's some interesting stuff in that as well. But this is him. I mean, do listen closely to every word. It's very short. This is Joe Biden, who apparently closely involved in those negotiations, announcing that ceasefire.
I can announce a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. For more than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th.
He doesn't even know who committed the October the 7th. He said it's Hezbollah.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God he's moving on. It's outrageous.
I mean, a couple of weeks ago, he also said that he was in negotiations with the Emir of Kuwait rather than of Qatar over this, which must have come as a real surprise to the Emir of Kuwait
absolutely,
to find that he was in the middle of these negotiations.
Let me also ask you about this NHS story. As a Royal College of Nursing report showing, I mean, again, war zones effectively in our hospitals. I mean, does it tell us anything new? Well, it's harrowing detail from nurses who worked on A&E wards and talk about the care in the corridors, just so routine now, to the extent that we're treating the Health Secretary. I mean, they literally just putting in, links for oxygen masks and things like that. So they're basically accepting that this is what's going to happen. Now, often if you're on a trolley, let's be honest, a lot of those trolleys are similar to the beds that are already in the wards. And it seems to me, having been in A&E in the last year, you don't necessarily need to have that much space around. I get that. Not everybody needs to have the sort of intense care that we often think of as someone needing in A&E, the triage and the like. But they are talking about patients who do need to be admitted, who are seriously unwell or seriously injured, lying on corridors for hours. I got a family member of mine, 24 hours with a broken pelvis, who is lying on a trolley for 24 hours before being admitted, and an elderly relative of mine stuck in an ambulance for 4 hours with heart problems and breathing problems. Luckily with the ambulance crew, you're safer with the ambulance crew there, but genuinely, and the extraordinary situation where you've got nurses saying we've got people dying on their trolleys and we don't even know they've died.
Yeah, I've had an elderly relative in a similar situation last year where they were just sort of stuck on a chair in a corridor for a very long time, having had a stroke, which is one of those things where you kind of think, good Lord, that could have gone very badly wrong. Fortunately, it didn't. But again, the NHS perpetually in crises that are foreseen decades in advance due to really simple things like changing demographics, like ageing populations, like an inability to train enough doctors and nurses, and, I'm afraid, exacerbated by the fact that we have huge numbers of people coming into this country who are able to access treatment the second that they get here. We're one of the few countries that does not demand that people sort of pay their own way or anything like that. Those numbers are only going to continue. And there doesn't really seem to be much of a long-term plan. I mean, forget the short-term plan to alleviate it. I'm all for short-term plans, but actually what we haven't heard for time immemorial is, what are you going to do about this long-term? How are you going to actually train enough doctors and nurses so you don't have to strip mine the third world for people who are underqualified to come and just prop up the thing? What are you going to do long-term? There isn't an answer to this. There is, not coming from government. We all know what the actual answer is, which is probably to completely rip down the edifice as it currently is and start again. But no politician is brave enough to actually talk about that. We're sort of fiddling on the edges, or a little bit more money here, maybe you'll have to pay for a few more appointments, or maybe you might have to pay for your prescriptions, or maybe we'll use AI, whatever that means. It's not actually
we're still using fax machines. The idea we're going to use AI, what an absolute
that we're going to have some sort of intelligent interface is just suddenly going to appear. It's not going to happen.
Well, look, news that came in the last half hour is going to be very interesting to see what happens, because we've had Labour MP Mike Amesbury. He's the MP for Runcorn and Helsby. He basically punched a man in the street back in Cheshire in October. It was an extraordinary story. He appeared in court this morning at Chester Magistrates Court. He pleaded guilty to assault by beating for punching that man. Now, obviously, he'll be sentenced for that at a later date, but that does mean there is going to be, of course, a by-election in that constituency. A majority of around 14,700 for Labour. Reform, though, in second place at 7,662. They've put it on their target list. Very, very interesting to see whether reform, have you seen that poll? There's 1 point behind Labour. The circumstances, of a recall, well, I mean, it won't even have to be a recall. He'll have to resign. Yeah. But, I mean, realistically, where do you think that will go?
I mean, what is that a swing that they'd need of about... How many thousand votes is that? Sort of 14,000 majority, and they had that. So it's not that large.
It completely changes. The turnout in elections is often it can be double that in a by-election.
Well, that's the thing. It's not. But
reform voters likely to turn out.
Well, exactly. Reform voters more likely to turn out. A lot of people very unhappy with Labour. It's not that big a swing. Even if there is a sort of a massive uptick, you wouldn't imagine that would be more people coming out to vote for the Labour candidate, given how things are currently going. Who knows? There could be the absolute whirlwind, and the Tories could come from nowhere to claim this seat. Lol. It's probably not going to happen. But, yeah, this is going to be a referendum, ultimately, on how well the government's doing. And the key thing is, actually, Reform don't even need to win it, necessarily. You just need to see a narrowing of that gap, and I suspect that is what you're going to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating. Well, you mentioned the Tories there. Kemi Badenoch's giving a speech in a couple of hours' time. Her first big speech of the new year. I think, what's going on in Gaza and elsewhere might actually take over a little bit more of that. Oh, by the way, we've also had the first major speech from Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. I mean, really, major speech by Ed Davey. Is that a thing? Yeah. Major arrival at a theme park, an amusement park by Ed Davey. Yes, that's the thing. Major splash falling off a paddleboard.
I don't know. Be this high to vote Lib Dem.
Exactly. So, yes, exactly. But Ed Davey's called for us, of course, to go back into the EU customs union. Of course he has. It's in his DNA. Interesting, Kemi Badenoch she's talked about how she's not going to make any proper policy commitments for a couple of years. I've got to be honest, I'm not sure that's going to fly. She's going to have some clear points, of where she stands on things. But in her speech, she's going to be talking about sort of admitting conservative errors, admitting mistakes. Crucially, over immigration, saying we're going to cut immigration and then rocket boost it's under it. Who did that? Who did that the most? Boris Johnson. Can everyone stop holding a candle for Boris Johnson, please? But also net zero, pushing for net zero targets, the 2050 target, but not having a plan. Again, that's not quite right, is it? Because the point is not having a net zero target is the thing. But also planning, pushing through Brexit without actually having a plan for growth outside the EU. There was no growth inside the EU. Has anyone seen what's happening to the EU economy right now? It's mad. It sounds like she's on the right track. Admitting mistakes on those two things, yes. But it seems to me that she's still not quite got it.
No, but I don't think she's likely to get it anytime soon. I don't think she'll make it to the next general election, if I'm being completely honest. It is a step in the right direction in that, theoretically at least, if you hold these things up and say, we made a mistake, we made a mistake, we made a mistake, theoretically, that should mean that the party does not then begin reversing back on these things if you have very publicly stood up and gone, wow, these were mistakes and we shouldn't have done them. Yeah. And I know that many members of the Conservative Party would really like to double down on net zero and on high migration and probably on rejoining the EU at some point. But if you draw a line under that, at least for Kemi Badenoch's leadership, hypothetically, that won't then happen. Yeah. But how long will she last? And when she does get knifed, which she will do by the party because she's not good enough to overcome Starmer or Reform, then the question will be, right, who do they go for? Somebody who is even more sort of inclined to make those changes?
Robert Jenrick has clearly not given up
of course.
his leadership.
I think that's sensible. But does that mean that we're going to get a Robert Jenrick, or does that mean that the Tories will go back to the more
James
centrist?
Cleverly?
Exactly. Are we going to go back to the man who started the Chagos Islands fiasco?
Yes.
It's the sort of thing that the Tories would do, because they hate themselves more than they hate the country. And, that's quite a feat,
that's an interesting analysis.
Basically sums them up.
What do you make of Keir Starmer visiting Kyiv? I was saying, looking like a member of New Order, interestingly. Signing this 100-year friendship deal. Okay, what does that matter? They just need money now. I still don't understand why all that money from Russian banks and Russian oligarchs frozen in bank accounts, still making money, by the way, for the banks that have got them in London. Why all that money hasn't just been literally strip those accounts, nice big big transfer. I mean, I think you're limited, aren't you, to 30,000, but I'm sure over a period of it, they could do a big transfer, just take it all over. There you go, Kyiv. This is for buying weapons. This is for rebuilding your country with Russian money after Russian devastation. The timing of this visit, I'm shocked that Keir Starmer, in the first 6 months of being Prime Minister, has gone everywhere. What are you doing in Saudi Arabia and you haven't visited Ukraine? I think that's outrageous. But secondly, the significance just before Donald Trump comes in, we know that Donald Trump is standing much more sort of firmly behind Israel than he is behind Ukraine. He wants both Russia and Ukraine to come to the table. That is a message that says to Putin, you can keep a load of your territory that you've stolen from the Ukrainian people. Is this Keir Starmer trying to show European support? Because at the end of the day, without American military might and backing, it doesn't really matter what we do.
Yeah, the UK is toothless. We're not a power anymore. Certainly not a military
power. We can't defend ourselves, let alone Ukraine.
And I think Keir Starmer is... I do think that he does believe in the Ukrainian cause, but also... he's looked at what it did for Boris Johnson. It kept Boris Johnson's head almost above the surface, because people do recognise also
Boris
that the
Johnson
Ukrainians...
did a good job there.
He did, even though, again, his government was vastly responsible for helping this country get to the position where it is effectively useless on the international stage. Keir Starmer's obviously making that worse, but it's nice to know that we're friends with people. On the subject of money transfers, the reason why that wasn't going to happen is if you start
Russian money frozen in bags here,
if you take Russian money that's in Western bank accounts and with Western institutions, and you say, well, we're going to give it to Ukraine, then overnight accounts run by China and just about every sort of Middle Eastern and African and Latin American country as well, they would start moving their accounts out of that Western banking system. And well, this is the problem. We say, oh, well, we have chained ourselves to this because we are part of a global community, which is the biggest load of nonsense you've ever heard. But that's what we've decided to do, and it would collapse a lot of the West's financial power, which is one of the few things that we still have, although...
basically, our entire country is run on the taxes paid by British banking in the city.
It is, but again, the rest of the world is wising up to this, which is why they are trying to move away, not just actually from the City of London, but they're actively trying to undermine the power of the dollar. China, Saudi Arabia, all of these countries, they recognise that actually the power is not infinite, and it can be shifted if they themselves decouple themselves from Western financial systems.
Talking of money and power, just briefly, in Joe Biden's sort of farewell address to the US people last night, he warned, it's wonderful, I love this, he warned of an oligarchy of wealth and power that's threatening US democracy. Clear dig at the number of billionaires, particularly the likes of Elon Musk, the world's richest man, surrounding Donald Trump. I think he's going to have, huge. I think half his cabinet are going to be billionaires. It's quite extraordinary. Now, he would say, well, I'm celebrating people who are just very successful, very good at what they do. But, of course, you might make a different take on that. But it's a bit rich, is Joe Biden. They have no issue with the people who own social media companies who were shilling for them and like Zuckerberg willing to do their bidding and censor for them to protect them and their terrible decisions over lockdown and things like that. And the Hunter Biden laptop. They've got no problem with billionaires and big business that does their bidding. There's got a problem with big business and billionaires who don't do their bidding. But the real worry, I think, for ordinary people and ordinary voters on both sides of the Atlantic is, you know what? Billionaires have more say than us.
Well,
that's not what democracy is supposed to be about.
A billion ain't what it used to be, thanks to inflation. Ever thus has it been, though, in the United States and here, frankly. There is this idea that once upon a time we lived in this wonderful, perfect democracy. Neither the UK nor the US has ever been a fully functioning democracy. Money goes a very long way. As I say, I'm not sure why people are surprised by this, especially also with the onset of technology and the greater power of more individuals over this sort of industry. And let's be honest here, that's partly because government is so far behind the curve. We're surprised that people like, the Silicon Valley tech moguls have a disproportionate amount of power. Yeah, that's because our own governments haven't got a clue what this stuff is and frankly aren't interested in it. Rather telling that when we were talking about, the AI revolution in the UK, the government announces, well, we're going to use it to solve potholes that have already been identified by people 6 months ago. And you think, Elon Musk will take himself to Mars. Jeff Bezos will get to the Kuiper Belt, and we will still be using AI to maybe slightly trim the NHS.
We will still not be filling in potholes.
Exactly.